Do you think there are nefarious actors within the United States government working on experiments to replace your memories with possible fictional ones? Do you think there are nefarious actors within the United States government trying to build monsters that roam the country? If so, you're in the right place. This is Inverted World Live. Hey everybody, we are really glad to be here. Thank you for tuning in. I am Shane Cashman, your host. I'm joined by Alex.
Hey there, Shane. Hi everybody, I'm Alex. Good to see you.
It's great to be here. I'm very excited for today's show. We have a great guest. As many of you watching probably already understand, the official story is never the full story. And one of the great examples of that is the book Chaos, written by Tom O'Neill, where he makes the reader walk through the Tate LaBianca murders, questioning for themselves what exactly happened, because it seems as though the official story is not the full story, and there are many fractured, depraved elements that, with a lot of connecting parts to possible CIA operations, MK Ultra, which is mind control for those who don't know. So, you know, if you've read Chaos, I think it's a great example of making people question reality and what they believe to be the official story. So let's bring on Tom and talk to Tom, Mr. Tom O'Neill.
Tom, are you with us?
I think so. I hope so. Can you
Oh,
hear me?
yeah.
Hey, Tom.
Hey, Tom.
How you doing?
So thank you for being here, Tom. I really appreciate it. Chaos is one of my favorite books. I recommend it to everyone. You do a great job of breaking this down in a way that's digestible for people who might not be, reading stuff from that world. And like we were saying earlier before we went live, you build the narrative in a way where I think it's digestible for people who are not inclined to think about things that are happening in nefarious conspiracies, if you want to call it, within the government. And by chapter 6, one of my favorite quotes is you're talking about you were never interested in conspiracies. You never questioned things like the JFK assassination or the moon landing. And you say, for the first time, I saw the appeal of trafficking in murky secrets. And this is around the time of the book where the narrative flips into these darker experiments, whether it's nefarious actors who infiltrate subversive groups in the country, like a civil rights movement, and you build into things like the mind control experiments, MK Ultra. So if you weren't interested in conspiracies then, and now you've maybe tripped into this world where things are not what they seem with the Tate LaBianca murders, how has that affected the way you see reality now moving forward? Like, do you see certain stories get out, like these official stories, and is your gut reaction to question?
I actually still approach everything kind of as a devil's advocate.
Yep.
But I guess I'm easier to persuade now than I was before all this.
Right.
So I like to think I'm open-minded, but I'm still skeptical.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that whole kind of that point of my reporting did kind of wake me up. I was a lot more naive, I think. I just didn't believe that there was a level of corruption beyond what I thought there was until then.
Yeah.
And so I'm more inclined to at least consider everything. Back then I wouldn't even think. I mean, when I moved out to LA, I can't remember if this is in the book or not, I seemed to encounter a lot more conspiracy minded people than I ever had when I lived in New York. Right. And it just seemed like such a cliche and boring and silly. And I would tell them, I don't want to talk about the Kennedy assassination. I'm sure, I just took the kind of mainstream narrative for granted. And I guess, I still have people talking to me about reptilian people living under the Earth's crust and things like that.
That's Shane's favorite topic.
Yeah. That's your next book. I'll get you down there soon enough. But speaking of evil, evil hiding amongst us. I think one of my takeaways from Chaos is just how evil someone like Bugliosi is. And that, for those who don't know, is the man who successfully prosecuted Manson. And he's a monster, as reported in your book. So like that must be something that changed the way you view everything.
Yeah, and before my experience with him became almost, I don't want to say I was a victim, but it got to be pretty psychologically abusive when he was threatening to make up these lies about me to damage me and stop my
Right.
book from being published. But prior to having that personal experience of him being awful, I'd heard from cops, and attorneys who had all worked on this case that he was crazy, and they said,
Right.
he's really nuts. And I'm like, you mean he's intense? He's really smart. They all gave him that. I go, but you mean he's intense and focused? They go, no, no, he is mentally ill.
Mm.
And then I found out, indeed, he was. When I find out what happened with the milkman's wife and his mistress, who he beat up, and the lies he told about them when they went public, and that predated his fame with the Manson case. So
Yep.
he was like that his whole life. I
I
mean,
mean,
his adult life.
violent, manipulative, lying, stalker, dangerous man who
Yeah.
beat a woman, his mistress, into having a miscarriage. Stalked the milkman that he believed, I think, was cheating on having an affair with
He
his
believed
wife.
that the milkman was the father of his firstborn son.
Right. And this is all, yeah, like you said, this all predates the Manson stuff.
Well, the
And then that
mistress
leads up.
was the Virginia Cardwell mistress was after the trial.
Okay.
But the milkman episode was 2 years before, and he should have been arrested and prosecuted.
Yes.
He kidnapped the milkman's daughter, and actually, I don't know if that's in the book. I think I only found that out after the book came out.
I don't think it is, yeah.
His daughter got in touch with me, and he picked her up at school, and took her to a toy store, told her she could buy whatever she wanted. She was like in first grade. And then he took her to the milkman's house, and he put all the gifts that he had bought her on the sidewalk in front of the house and dropped her off and waited for the parents to come out. And then he kind of waved at them and drove away.
Oof.
And I knew that the papers I did have that I had uncovered, there was something from the school saying, do not let anybody else pick her and her brother up from school. Only the parents can pick them up. They're not allowed to go on buses. I didn't know that was because he had already done this. I never knew that he had actually taken her, from the school and had her for a couple hours.
It's my biggest nightmare.
Yeah, I know. And he's an actual monster. And like I have documents to show like all these things that have happened with him. He made that one, I believe the mistress say something like it wasn't an abusive thing.
Yeah, he went to her after she had reported to the police that he beat her up. He went back the next day with his secretary and pretty much held her captive for hours until she agreed to go to the police and say she had filed a false report.
Right.
And
It's crazy. So when I read the Bugliosi parts of your book and I'm confronted with a monster, and I think Charlie Manson also a monster in different ways, but also many similar ways. But this guy's operating in the daylight like a buttoned up, more like a Ted Bundy type. He's existing.
That's a good comparison. I never thought of.
It's scary because he's like the antithesis to you in Chaos. He obviously, for those who've read the book, he threatens you with lawsuits. He's obviously, like you just said, threatens other people. For anyone who wants to subvert whatever narrative he's selling, and again, for those who don't know, he wrote Helter Skelter, which is one of the most widely purchased. It's a great best-selling book about his time with the Manson case, and it's won like an Edgar Award. But what I wanted to know from you is, it's interesting to me that he then went on to write books about like JFK assassination.
Well, that was his opus, whatever that was his life's work, the culmination. He was more proud of that than anything.
Right.
And it took him 20 some years to write it. But yeah, is your next question, do I believe that he had to do that book for someone else?
Well, I want to get there in a sec, but also just it's interesting to me that the person who becomes your basic, enemy is trying to discredit your narrative, which subverts his story, and then goes on to write a big book that discredits all conspiracies about JFK. And he does all these lectures, he does these interviews about it. And when you watch him speak, he looks like he's lying, in my opinion. His body language looks like he's lying. There's something about him that he seems compromised and like a liar. But when you see him doing that, are you thinking he's been told to write these things, to say these things?
Well,
'Cause it seems weird.
this is a theory, and I don't know again how much I say this in the book or not. I haven't read
Hmm.
it in 5 years, but I believe he was given this case, which was, the until the OJ trial, the biggest case in Los Angeles history, if
Yeah.
not California, the United States, the biggest criminal trial. And he was given it as a young attorney. He was actually very successful, but he wasn't well known. He had done a double murder case that got a lot of press before it, but they knew what he had done with this milkman. I mean, he had gotten one of their DA's investigators to follow and basically report on the milkman's activities. And he lied and said that the reason that he assigned this investigator to the milkman was because he was a witness in a murder case. And then, like I said, he abducted the milkman's daughter from school. He was writing threatening notes. He should have lost his license. He should have
Hmm.
been convicted. I believe that he was compromised, and Evel Younger, who was the district attorney who assigned him, ex-FBI, ex-OSS, really spooky guy. I believe that Bugliosi was told how to present that case and how
Yeah.
to try it in a dishonest way. I mean, the right people went to prison, but not a lot. There were a lot more tentacles that were erased, and I think that
For
was
sure.
Bugliosi's job. And then the same thing 40 years later, or 50 years later, when he did his Kennedy assassination book, which, in his grandiose version was the book to end the conspiracies forever, that there was more than one gunman, that was Oswald acting alone.
Right.
I'm not an expert on the Kennedy assassination. In my book, I just keep it very narrowly focused to just Jack Ruby and how the investigation was compromised because a CIA doctor who was a mind control specialist
Hmm.
got into his cell and caused him to have a nervous breakdown right before he testified to the Warren Commission. That's my only real knowledge, but I know who the writers are who present very valid cases, that there was a group that was behind this. And I've read their writings about Vincent's book and Reclaiming History, and they demolish it. They show how he cherry picked, how he
Hmm.
ignored stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
everything you're not supposed to do. When you're a prosecutor, you present a case that supports your case. But when you're writing a historic book that's supposed to be about the real truth, you can't do that there. You have to present it as objectively as possible. And some of
Hmm.
the biggest complaints about my book is I don't have resolution. I don't definitively say things. And that's because I couldn't do that in fairness because I couldn't prove everything. I can
Yeah.
only show how things happen differently.
Right.
That's why I'm a big fan of your book, is because I'm usually skeptical. Typically, I'm skeptical of people who tell me that they definitively have the answer. I believe
Yeah.
there's no resolution in life. Unfortunately, there's a lot of, you can find answers here and there, but these big stories, the digger you deep, the more mystery there is. And when I look at the Bugliosi stuff, he's so adamant about these things that I'm like, well, now I think he's just trying to sell me a story. It's like his book and his speeches that I've seen it's almost like a billboard for a false narrative that he's got to sell, for
Yeah.
whomever, whether it's himself or whatever. But you mentioned Jack Ruby, which is where I wanted to go next in terms of monsters. Let's talk about Jolly West, because when I read about Jolly West in your book, he might make people think about characters in Batman like Scarecrow, like someone who can administer some type of drug to make you go mad, or to erase your brain. So how was it when you discovered that stuff? And what do you think about the mind control experiments and where they are? Do you think they finished the mind control experiments? Or do you think they're still going?
That's a good question.
Um, the latter part of the question about whether MK Ultra continued after it officially ended in '73. I have no proof, but I sure wouldn't be surprised. I don't
Right.
know why they would spend all that money and all those resources for 20 some years. It was the most money the CIA spent on any project ever up until that point.
Hmm.
And the big lie that they told when it was disclosed and there were Senate and congressional investigations was they presented themselves as the gang that couldn't shoot straight. Like, oh, we stupidly thought that we could create programmed assassins and, implant memories, but they said they weren't successful at it. I believe that was a story concocted so they could keep that technology and then probably keep using it, but
Right.
definitely hide what they had done. And, they destroyed all the records of MK Ultra. Richard Helms, who was the head of the CIA, when it ended. He
Yep.
actually began it. He wasn't the head then. That was Alan Dulles, but he
Right.
really was the guy in charge of it. And then Sidney Gottlieb, who was the head of technical services, who was a scientist who kind of created or managed all of the experiments they did on people without their knowledge or consent. Everything was destroyed. I mean, the records that I found of Jolly West were accidentally left in his archive at UCLA.
Right.
And it was a little combination of luck and perseverance that I reached out to them just because I had a hunch. West had been identified since the disclosure of MK Ultra in the 70s. He was on the front page of the New York Times as one of, I think, 13 contracted academics, scientists who were affiliated with the universities, who was accused of doing this stuff. And he denied it to the Times. He said that he had been approached and said, no, that's crazy. I don't want to have anything to do with this. And he went to his grave in 98, I think. Every time anybody would say, were you, he would not only deny it, but he would threaten to sue them.
Right.
And it turned out he not only was part of it, he did the blueprint for it with Gottlieb. And I just happened, after spending months in his archive at UCLA, to find these letters where Sidney Gottlieb, had used a pseudonym, Sherman Grifford, and from 1953, right when it started, between West and Gottlieb, saying how they were going to do the experiments, how they were going to hide it from the subjects and the people, if it was at Lackland Air Force Base or at a university setting, how they hide it from his colleagues, how they'd hide the funding. They were going to double envelope correspondence. I mean, the whole thing was a massive lie. And we really, to this day, don't know what they did because, except for the stuff I found in West Files, people haven't found too much of a paper record, really any of a paper record of
Yeah,
what was
I feel like when you dig into this research, the more you dig, it's like, are you uncovering? This is what I would be asking myself: uncovering just mass incompetence in the bureaucracy, or have conspiracies been compartmentalized into such a way where you're made to look paranoid for connecting the dots?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know either. I know it's like I think about that a lot. Like I was telling you about my reporting into a serial killer in Long Island. There's monsters in the authorities that have served prison time for doing horrible things. And those are the people who were in charge of the investigation as these things, are totally bumbled and falling apart. And, there's no answers for years and years and years. So when it comes to Jolly West, you talk about the Lackland Air Force Base. Could you give us a brief description of Schaefer and what happens? This to me is one of the more horrifying events in your book.
Yeah, so I found the letters where Jolly and Gottlieb were discussing experiments that he was going to do at the Lackland Air Force Base. So he was the head of psychiatry at this Air Force Base I think he began in 1952, and he was there till 56. And in 53, he's saying he's going to use LSD, different drugs, and then also different forms of sensory deprivation, hypnotism, to see it. And he had a bullet point list of what their objectives were. And they were to erase true memories, replace them with false memories, get people to do acts that were against their moral code, and be amnesic of the programming of them to do it. And he was going to do it on subjects at the Air Force Base who were in the hospital. There's a big hospital there.
Mm-hmm.
Who were seeking treatment for mental disorders or some kind of
headaches,
anything where he would get control over them.
Yep.
So I read the letters and I found out that, West had lied his entire career and he had never been investigated as far as we know. His name never came up in the congressional hearings. All it took was his one denial to Cy Hirsch at the New York Times in 1975 for nobody to follow up and say, well, wait, maybe he's just lying. So once I knew that that was what he wanted to do, and I'd never heard of Jimmy Shavers before, but I kept going through his boxes, which had never been released. He had only died a year before, and they were released because I contacted the university and I said, I know that he was a prominent figure there for 20 years. Oftentimes they leave their papers to their, the university that they identified with. And they said, yeah, we've got, I think they had 200, 300 boxes, but they hadn't been processed. They said, so we have to process them. And I really worked that poor archivist, Charlotte Brown, until I said, look, I'm on deadline. I have to turn a story into a magazine because that was true. So she started releasing a couple boxes at a time. Wow. And I went the whole summer and then into the fall just to look at 3 or 4 days a week through these boxes, looking for a needle in a haystack. So after I found those really important letters, then I found these folders, which had all the clippings and then his personal transcripts of his experiences as Jimmy Shavers' psychiatrist. So Jimmy Shavers was an air instructor who I think been in the Korean War. He no history of violence, no criminal history. Early 30s, he had a wife and a newborn and maybe another kid with a prior wife. Well, one day, I think it was a day before the 4th of July in 1954, a little girl went missing, 3 years old, from a bar. Her parents had gone there at like 10 or 11 o'clock at night because it was a real oppressive heat wave. And the kids couldn't sleep. They couldn't sleep. So they brought Sherry Joe and her brother, who was 6, to this bar. And they were inside having drinks. And the little girl was outside playing. And then the brother ran in and said the girl had gone missing. Someone had taken her. So there was a massive search. And they actually used the Lackland Air Force Base, officers and enlistees and whatever to go looking for the girl. And I think it was like an hour or 2 hours later, these 2 guys in a gravel pit who've been working in the gravel pit had fallen asleep, and they noticed this guy walking towards them, and his shirt was off and he was covered in blood. And he said, I don't know how I got here, or where am I? And then I can't remember if the police came at the same time or if they called them. Anyway, the cops came and they arrested him. They were actually taking him to the police headquarters, and somebody from the base came and they said, he's part of our base. The military wants to take custody of him. So they took custody of him, brought him to the base, had him for 3 or 4 hours, then brought him back and turned him back over to the state authorities or local authorities. And he basically confessed after 24 hours to killing this raping and killing a 3-year-old.
Oh my God.
But he said he had no memory of abducting her or doing any of that. He just figured he had to have been the one who did, because she had been scratching his body when this happened. And then Wes got assigned to be his psychiatrist for the trial. And I just started, connecting dots and seeing that it seemed like everything that happened to this guy was exactly what Wes had been doing for at least a year at that point with patients at the hospital. I found out that he had been a patient. I could never determine that he'd been a patient of Wes, but he would have had to have been. He had crippling migraine headaches that his mother testified to, that he had to put his head in buckets of ice water, and that he had sought special treatment at Lackland. So everything just added up. I'm sure they didn't want him to go out and kill a 3-year-old girl. Right. But I think that it was an experiment gone wrong.
Yeah, it backfired.
And then covered up. I mean, and I go into detail in the book about how the narrative was changed in that. And
yes, yeah.
West's involvement.
Yeah. Did you do any more research on I think you mentioned brain implants that Jolly West was doing at one point?
He was never, as far as I know, he wasn't doing them. He was trying to open something called the Center for the
Violence Center,
Study and Control of Violence at UCLA.
Right.
It began in 1971.
Right.
And the proposals leaked out to the student body and to other faculty members at UCLA, and there was a massive movement he was going to there was an abandoned missile silo in the Santa Monica Mountains, not too far from where the Manson family had lived a couple of years earlier in the
Mm,
Spahn Ranch.
mm.
And they were going to have violent criminals, prisoners brought there, experimented on, and they wanted to see if they could put electrodes in their brain and then kind of provoke them into doing a violent act and then seeing if they could pull it back, basically control their violent instincts and also try to predict which ones would be violent and which weren't. And I mean, it was a crazy Nazi kind of concentration camp experiment on human beings
Yep.
with people who, had no independence or they wouldn't be giving consent. So it went before the state legislature because you had to get funding. And Ronald Reagan, who was the governor, was a big champion of it. And
That's right.
the legislature actually turned it down and it never happened.
Jeez. And you connect it in the book. And I don't know if it's connected in real life or how much it might be, but like the rat and mice experiments that Calhoun was doing, and I think it was another person who was actually given the mice or rats acid. Is that right?
Yeah, David Smith.
David Smith.
Yeah, David Smith was the founder of the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, which opened in the Summer of Love in 1967 in San Francisco. And his research for him to get his PhD was on the aggregation of mice. And when we say mice or rats, this is what's so confusing. And I think hopefully I present it in the book. David was constantly contradicting himself in interviews
Right.
with me. Sometimes he'd refer to them only as rats, and then all of a sudden he called them mice. And in the early papers I found, they were definitely mice. But in later articles that he'd written, he would change the species to rat. And I'm not a scientist. I'm like the worst science person in the world.
Wait, isn't that like tomato, tomato, right? Mice,
Yeah, no,
rat?
and it's so important, not
Yeah.
only
Okay.
the species, but the breed of mouse or rat.
Yeah.
So the fact that he couldn't keep that story straight, that was kind of a red flag to me. But
Hmm.
anyway, he did admit that he was trying, so they were aggregating mice the way Calhoun did it and creating what coined the term for behavioral sync.
That's right.
Smith used that in all of the interviews he did for years when he was talking about communal living, how that led to violence
Hmm.
and drug, use and speeds and all that kind of stuff. He acted like he invented that term behavioral sync, but it was Calhoun. Calhoun
Wow.
did the first studies,
Yep.
but he didn't do it. He would aggregate rats, and then he found out that when you aggregate rats, a killer dominant alpha rat emerges. And in his papers, Calhoun in I think 62 or 63 published these papers, or maybe late 50s, talking
Hmm.
about how the rat would have a harem of female rats that he'd rape, and the
Oh gosh.
male rats would end up becoming subjugated to the head rat,
Yep.
and they would go out and kill girl rats and rat families and tear them into pieces. Well, David Smith replicated that, but then he would give them amphetamines and LSD and try to control their behavior in 1965 and 66. Then all of a sudden he opens this clinic, and a fixture at the clinic is a guy named Charlie Manson, who all of a sudden has been released
Hmm.
from prison and kind of evolves into someone who has a following of subservient women, young
Hmm.
women, who will do anything he tells them to do. And then 2 years later, they go out and kill on command. So I draw parallels to the objectives of what the CIA was trying to do with just controlling people's behavior
Yep.
and creating assassins to what Manson did and what Smith did. It's all complicated and crazy, but hopefully,
Was
um,
Manson always kind of nuts, or like it
well,
that
no,
you're saying that
Manson
the
was
government
actually completely different than what he
he
became in
became?
'67. Yeah, he was nonviolent, mostly. I mean, supposedly he raped a couple boys when he was in his teens
Hmm.
in a juvenile delinquent home.
Okay.
He later said at parole hearings he killed kids. So I
Well,
don't
I mean
know
that seems
what's
kind of
true
nuts.
and what isn't, but he was institutionalized from the time he was about 12 or 13 until he was released in the Haight in '67 from prison, but he had never done he had never done a violent crime. It was always petty crimes, and it was always federal jurisdiction. So Bugliosi makes a point of that in the book. He said he had never seen someone serve so much time for such small crimes, and in federal prisons, which, prisons are a lot rougher than jails. Plus, they're controlled by the federal government. And we didn't know it then, but the federal government was experimenting on prisoners. Most famously, now we know about Whitey Bulger, who it was disclosed that he was a subject of non-consenting MK Ultra LSD experiments when he was in prison in the 50s. So David Smith did those the early mice stories, and I draw parallels to John Calhoun's rat studies, and I try to get David to. I still don't know David's total involvement in this, and what he did or didn't do, or whether he was being used, or whether he was consciously involved in helping. He was getting funded by the federal government for his whole clinic.
That's what I mean earlier by this stuff being so compartmentalized. One of the things Bugliosi says when he's talking about the JFK assassination conspiracies is that, Oswald didn't know these people. You think he was working for them? They would have had a car waiting for him to get away. But in my mind, it's not like that at all. It's like they've got tentacles everywhere, people working, they don't even know they're working for people. I don't know. Who knows if Manson knew these people or not, or knew he was being puppeteered by people.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, and my takeaway is Manson's almost like a microcosm of what the CIA was doing to him, or MK Ultra, right? Like Manson, the way they describe him all the time is he was hypnotizing the family, and they were working under his control. Well, that's what they were doing in MK Ultra. They were trying to wash it away.
If he was on LSD, he might have been doing that.
Well, yeah, they say. I mean, like Tom was just saying, they're going to the amphetamine project and getting dosed up, and then they're doing LSD, and then. Then basically Manson's doing the same thing to the people in the family. I can only imagine how many other type of Mansons were out there running around. And it's speculative, obviously, but I don't think it's too far of a reach to think that a lot of these things backfired, just none of them made, national news like Manson.
Yeah.
But the question is why, isn't it? Why?
Sorry?
Why?
Why? Why? Yeah. Do you have any? What do you think? Is it really just to create super soldiers, or do you think there's something else involved in why they do these things?
Well, I don't really like to speculate on anything prior to 73,
right?
Because I don't know anything from my own firsthand reporting about anything post 73. But I think prior to 1973, when the program ended or didn't end, I believe that they began it in good faith. There was a Cold War going on. There was a hysteria, but people thought that, we could become subjugated, or, the Chinese communists or Russian communists were going to invade, take over. There was going to be nuclear war. So they were trying to create any kind of weaponry to combat what they thought the other side had. And the other side, the Nazis really started using drugs to do mind control experiments. And then when the Nazi scientists were dispersed, we brought a lot of them over here in Operation Paperclip that we were talking about off camera.
Yep.
And then, but the Chinese and the Russians got them too. And during the Korean War, there was a brainwashing program run by China, and the United States learned about it. And then they thought defensively, they wanted to know how to prevent airmen who were captured overseas from being brainwashed, which they alleged happened. So it began as a defensive thing for them to study how not to let this happen. And then when they realized the power of it, it became offensive, and they wanted to learn how to do it better than the other side.
Right.
I'm not even 100% sure that we weren't doing it much longer than we know about, and maybe even before the Nazis.
Right. I'm sure we were. And I have a hard time trying to find a positive spin on it. Although I hear that argument, because it's almost like an argument people would make about gain of function and experimenting on ways viruses could attack us, and want to get ahead of it. But it always seems to backfire. And then when you're talking about the Korea experiments and the brainwashing, that's in your book. And this quote is something I really loved. technology has destabilized every atom of human nature. And that's, when talking about the Korean War, human experimentation, that's what scares me is, although they say MK Ultra ended in 73, I'm pretty confident that it expanded into all technology we have today. If that's something that's being said about the Korean War, I'm afraid to think of what it looks like today in all the things that we are plugged into.
Our influencers influencing us.
Right.
And disturbing us.
Yeah. I mean, every time there's a mass shooting now, I get tons of emails from people,
I'm sure,
wanting to know what I know about the possibility that person was. And I'm like, no, it stops at 73 for me.
It's impossible.
Know that stuff.
It's hard to know. And I'm the same way, where I can't help but think it, in terms of just, I believe it was last summer, early fall, there was a mass shooter in Maine. And
I remember.
He was a guy who was in a psych ward hearing voices. And a lot of people were saying it must be MK Ultra. And obviously it's impossible to know until maybe some documents are released later down the road. But it's very similar to a lot of the stories you talk about in Chaos, where also I believe it was in the Army, or maybe Navy. I forget which one.
I can't remember. Did they kill him? I know he was
he killed himself
for a few days.
He killed himself. They found him at a dumpster at an old job site.
Okay, yeah.
But it's tough, and when you look at these stories so deeply, I was curious while reading Chaos. Did you feel a sense of paranoia after a certain point? Are you I know there's a part in the book where I think you say you're not afraid to have done the call with Charles Manson at your own place, but your editor or someone says to do it at the But were you feeling any sense of paranoia?
Can you leave your house, Tom?
Everybody was trying to make me feel paranoid. I mean, people, my friends and family and stuff, be careful, and I really never felt threatened. I mean, there was one guy, I talk about him in the early chapters, a couple of these drug dealers who were the first suspects in the tape murders, Billy Doyle and Charles Taco, and Billy Doyle was in Toronto, and I knew he had killed people and not gone to prison for it.
Right.
And he said to me how easy it would be for him to hire somebody who could shoot me. And I mean, he used all the weaponry lingo that I didn't know. You get this kind of gun, they could be this far away, he could shoot you right through your window. He did seem to know a little bit about how my bungalow was set up, which made me nervous. I felt a little nervous by him and his partner, Charlie Taco, but Charlie Taco was like an invalid. I'd take him out to Coco's for lunch, and I'd have to lift him out of my car.
That's right.
And then put him in a wheelchair, and he's threatening to kill me. And I'm like, Charlie, I could just drop you and leave you in the parking lot. You can't kill me. But no, I never really became worried about my safety until Vince Bugliosi and I really went at loggerheads, and I knew what he had done in the past, and I knew what he was capable of, and he scared me more than anybody else, because he still had, he had a reputation and he had connections and power, and if he wanted to spread a lie about you or hurt you, he would do it. I mean, he told me he'd do it.
Right.
So on that tape. And I mean, one of the biggest disappointments, and I know a lot of my detractors think that I waited until he died for the book to come out. He died, I think, in 2015 or 16, and I was devastated because I really wanted him to be held accountable.
Yeah.
I knew it would be a much harder fact check when we did the book because of my allegations, but I felt confident that all of my allegations would survive a fact check. And as it turned out, so he died 2016, I think. My book came out in 2019. And Little Brown, the publisher, had 2 different outside legal firms do the fact check to make sure, they checked each other's check.
Right.
And when I said to them, I go, I guess you guys are happy that Vince Bugliosi is dead. And they said, it really doesn't make a difference because his wife owns his estate, and his estate makes a fortune from Helter Skelter is the best-selling true crime book of all time. It still sells. So she could sue you on behalf of his estate the same way he could have sued you, because most of what I was attacking was his work in the case and that book. So they said she would have an easy lawsuit to file if she can find grounds or you've made anything up or lied, but they didn't find a single thing that I had to modify or take out or change.
Do you
So I
find
was disappointed that he wasn't alive too. I wanted him to have to answer to all this.
Yeah. Do you think he would have lashed out? You think all the threats would have come true?
Yeah, I mean, it would have been interesting because he found out that my publisher had canceled the deal. He was writing to them. I mean, I have a file of his letters that he sent to them, and I think he believed that he was the reason my book deal was canceled in
Wow.
2012.
Wow.
I got a little nervous that maybe that was one of the reasons, but we talked about
Right.
this before he went on camera. But they assured me it wasn't him; it was something else, financial. But yeah, so when he died, he did not know because I hadn't resold the book until 2017.
Right.
So he probably thought none of this was ever going to come out, and that I
Right.
had disappeared into homelessness or something because he knew how I had spent so much of my money chasing
Right.
his facts about him and the case. So yeah,
Wow.
he
When you're doing this research and talking to all these different people and getting information, even FOIA requests, do you have a system to discern what to trust? Like, is there something?
yeah, I kind of had a methodology that was kind of, I never studied journalism. I was mostly an self-taught entertainment journalist who got
Right.
some lucky breaks and got a career at it. And then I started doing investigative stories for the magazines I worked for about the entertainment industry. I did do one true crime story right before this one that was about a woman who was murdered in somewhere outside of Sacramento and it wasn't solved. So that was the only experience I had really with interviewing cops and criminals and stuff.
Hmm.
Although I actually did do a story on celebrity stalkers.
We need you to do Epstein or P. Diddy. Just pick one.
Yeah, I know. But gosh, now I forget the how I decide. So I
Yeah.
would get access. I mean, what I really worked hard at the beginning of this was trying to talk to people who were, integral to the case, who had never been interviewed before, either cops, lawyers, or witnesses, like Rudy Altobelli, who owned the house where the murders happened, was a really important witness. A
Hmm.
guy named Hatami, who was a photographer, Sharon Tate's personal photographer, who had an encounter with Manson, may or may not, that kind of triggered a lot of what happened later. These guys had never given interviews. And I was lucky because, this was 30 years after the crime. Now they're senior citizens. Now they're kind of bored. They don't get attention. So I got to them at a good time and I was
That's right.
persistent. I was a pain in the ass.
Yeah. Good.
So they would tell me stuff that was completely contradictory to the narrative. And I get really excited. And then I'm like, but how do I know they're not just either misremembering,
Yeah. Right.
inflating,
Yep.
embellishing, or out and out lying? So then I would try to get documents. So I tried to find out what they told the police in their first interviews, and that's in the book. I started chasing the whole LAPD homicide file, which had never been shared, but the second in command cop had the whole thing in Utah, where he lived next door to Demi Moore and Bruce Willis,
Wow.
and then later in Palm Springs. And it took me about 6 years to wear him down enough where he finally shared the whole thing with me. So I
Wow.
would always try to find whatever documents were available, and second and third corroborating witnesses. So I started being able to put value on the stuff that I was finding out that did contradict the narrative by
Hmm.
proving that it was true.
Yeah.
But it's not easy, as you
It's
know,
not.
because you do
Yeah.
this kind of thing.
It's not easy. People. I don't think a lot of people realize how long a FOIA request can take to come through.
Oh yeah, and I don't know if you do FOIAs to the CIA, but I don't even do them anymore because they don't release anything
I
ever.
don't think I have. It's just been. Well, I did one that was the Pentagon for a murder that was covered up, and they.
Well, the Pentagon might be
Yeah.
easier. The CIA is just, they're never going to release anything that's important. The
Right.
FBI surprises me with stuff that they'll release. Sometimes I think they don't understand what they're releasing. And they often, and this is for any investigators out there, people, I learned this on my own, but don't just FOIA the main headquarters of the FBI in DC. Always go to field offices
Yes.
because every major city has a field office and they have files and they have to respond to. And
Yep.
I've gotten stuff out of like a podunk state in Ohio where Manson might have been arrested for something from their FBI files that don't exist at the headquarters or weren't released.
Right.
And they often don't redact the whole thing like they're supposed to, because
Huh.
whoever's getting paid to do the redactions isn't getting paid enough. And I
Mm-hmm.
get social security numbers, I get
Wow.
witness names, all this stuff that's redacted on some pages, but then accidentally missed 20 pages later.
Whoops.
Wow.
Now I'm probably
That's
ruining it for everyone because someone from the FBI is going to see this and they're going to give them
yeah.
raises or something.
All
Don't
the
tag the FBI.
all the feds that are watching each of us on the daily basis are now like, "Toot, toot, 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 toot."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. And I FOIA the Pentagon. And I think they might have lied to me though, because I know that there was a murder at a certain place in a town where I'm from.
Oh,
And
go figure, the Pentagon's lying.
yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And then I also worry about, and I think I know you experienced this while writing Chaos and researching, is them giving you bogus information. Like,
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
you think about that, or sharing information with someone who then takes it and doesn't share it back with you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That was a DA's office here in LA.
Right.
Um,
When you see that happening, like, see that's the thing that would make me paranoid, because then it's like, are they all connected to this, and have they been told by someone higher up, hey,
Yeah.
this guy's talking to you, don't talk to him anymore, push him aside?
Yeah.
What is going on there?
that's when I would wake up in the middle of the night and think the world can't be that corrupt and it can't be that efficient, you know. And then you're right. I mean, the secret is compartmentalization, is people don't know what other people are doing, and that's deliberate.
Right.
I mean, the guy who ran the CIA, and I'm going to get it mixed up now, who inherited it from Helms when Helms left during Watergate. I think it was Colby or no, somebody before Colby or, oh, no, I'm sorry. It was the guy who ran the CIA after Dulles got fired by JFK
Okay.
and before he was replaced by Helms, so the early 60s. He said that he never knew about the MK Ultra program. And I believe him. I can't remember why. I did a lot of reporting and research because, and as the head of the CIA, they knew that he would object to it.
Right.
Whereas Dulles didn't. He created it with Gottlieb. So they kept it from him for like 4 years while he was there. He never knew about it until he was gone.
Right.
And at the CIA, they compartmentalized, and that's how they can do stuff and not get caught. You know, they
Yeah.
erase the connections.
It makes it easier, right, to get away with these things. And then
Yeah, yeah.
it's hard to have any accountability because it's just a Mexican
Yeah.
standoff of like who did what, and we don't know. You know, that stuff is very concerning to me. And watching stuff like you mentioned the Church Committee and COINTELPRO going on, you know, do you think about what we could even uncover 20, 30 years from now? That's the stuff that also scares me. What they're doing today that we don't know about, that in 20 or 30 years we might uncover.
I know.
It's pretty wild.
I know. No, it is when you think about. I mean, I try not to at this point. And again, it keeps me sane by just staying in the past. If I
Right.
thought about what's going on in the present, you know, I would try to figure it out, and then I'd never do anything except this, which I practically only do anyway.
And part of it, I mean, when I was writing and still am researching the serial killer case I was telling you about, there's a point at which you feel like you might be untethered from reality. And maybe you experience that or not, but I'm looking at, you know, your book, I'm looking at the Tate LaBianca murders and all of the bizarre coincidences that take place. And like, I don't really believe in coincidences, but I was just thinking about this while rereading Chaos, you know, I mean, and they're weird and they could just be nothing, but Rosemary LaBianca, Polanski did Rosemary's Baby the year before. He's in London doing a movie, or he was going to do a movie called Day of the Dolphin or something, which was about assassinating the president based on
John Lilly's research.
John Lilly is doing LSD experiments as well. Am I right?
Yeah.
You know, it's just so bizarre.
Yeah.
It's so bizarre to me that, you know, all those things line up like that, and I can't help but spin out of control sometimes. And maybe it is just by chance that's happening.
Well, you know, I can't tell you how many cops said to me, and I know I quote one in the book, that there's no such thing as coincidence. Cops told me that's what we work on. You know, if it looks like a coincidence, usually. But then again, I have long emails from people who say, well, this person lived there when that happened in that decade, and they were a third cousin of this person. I'm like, my mind's just scrambling.
You could only take so much. But unless I'm wrong, the LaBianca murders are believed to be random, right? Like they didn't pick them for any reason.
I don't believe that, but that's the official.
That's the official narrative. And what can you
Yeah,
say?
and
What you believe?
I did not put a lot about the LaBianca murders in the
Right.
book, which I
Right.
felt kind of embarrassed by myself and ashamed of because they deserve more attention. But I didn't have enough of the pieces in place. Not that I do now, I have a lot
Right.
more, but I still am not, I'm convinced that they were targeted.
Hmm.
And that it wasn't a couple that was just picked because of proximity to another house that Manson was familiar with.
Right.
I was talking to you off camera about, a second book.
Yep.
They're going to get their due
Oh,
justice in
good.
the second book.
Yeah, because
If
it
I
doesn't feel. I really hope that happens. I really look forward to a second book, and I also don't think it was random. And even though it sounds silly, perhaps to some, the fact that her name was Rosemary just makes me feel like it was. It all seems so methodically absurd, you know.
The parallels to the Rosemary's Baby and her getting impregnated,
Yes.
and
Everything. I mean, and there's no way
yeah,
for anyone to know. And I think this has been documented. I know you mentioned it in the book about Roman Polanski on the night of the murders in London giving the story about a friend's death and then saying you never know who's next. And then he gets the phone call. Like, obviously, you can't
that's
plan that, but it's
yeah. I
just
didn't find that
insane.
out on my own. That was published. I can't remember what my source is, but it'll be in the end notes. But that really, he did say that. Oh, I think he said something like "Eeny, meeny, miny, mo," who will be the next to go, something like that.
Oh God.
Right.
And
It's
then his behavior, I won't get into it now because
right.
it's really getting into the weeds, but he did some really strange stuff in the weeks and months after this. I don't know what it means, and I stay away from it in the book because
Right.
I didn't want to get that fantastical, but it's
Right.
something I do kind of revisit a lot. And I had a chance to interview him years ago, and I was told by his contact, his producing partner who had been with him for decades, that he said, "You'll never persuade me to recommend Roman talk to you, but I'll talk to you for 5 minutes." He met with me at the Beverly Wilshire, and the 5 minutes turned into 2 or 3 hours.
Oh
And at the
wow.
end of it, he said, "You've got enough new stuff that I'll tell Roman to talk to you," and he will, "but you've got to wait until you've put everything together because you can only do it once. He'll get really upset. It'll give him, he'll be in a black mood for months after, but I want him to answer this to this, but wait until you're ready. Don't jump the gun." So I waited, and then it became too late because then he had the thing where he was held in house arrest in Sweden or Switzerland, and then
Yeah.
he just completely stopped talking to the press. And
Mm.
then he's been Me Too'd, and
Yeah.
he can't even release a film here. So I could still try him through a couple people, but I
Yeah.
don't think he's ever going to tell me anything. I don't know. It's one of those things that's kind of in my back pocket. Like, should I try one more time? Because who
Yeah.
knows
I
how
think
long
it's
he's
worth
going to
it.
be.
I think it's
I
worth
know it
it.
is. Yeah. Yeah.
Like talking to all these people, I think is so worth it because you created a whole new picture. Like the person who owns the house, and from the beginning of the book and then to the end when you talked about Bugliosi, I think threatening them with a smear campaign
Oh, yeah.
to discredit
He
you.
Rudy Altobelli and
Right.
me. He was trying
It's
to get
just
Rudy to sign a document saying he hadn't said what he said to me. And I have that document. Rudy gave it to me.
which is exactly what Bugliosi did to the mistress.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the same
Yeah.
things, which is the government does it. It's interesting to me. The thing about Manson that always did interest me was that crime was a symbol for America, right? It's like a time capsule of paranoia and violence and
Oh,
the
yeah.
downfall of an age of quote unquote innocence, right? And your book kind of explodes all of that even to a bigger picture where it's like, and maybe you felt this way, that crime seems like you could go on forever and ever in the tentacles of the CIA, the government, evil in general, all these experiments. It's like just one section of like a much longer intestine, right?
It bled
Which
into
is
so
baffling.
much other stuff. Yeah, I shouldn't use the word bleed. I guess that's a pun or something. But
Right. But
yeah,
seriously, I mean, it has bled into the American consciousness, and I think you see it in the beginning. Like once you look at this case, the Charles Manson case, you will see it everywhere. It's still referenced today. He's up there with all the other evil. He's on the Rushmore of evil, right?
oh yeah,
And everyone
that's
talks about
I should
him.
have used that in the book, The Rushmore of Evil. That's how my editor, I didn't want to do it when she assigned it as a magazine story, and she said, "Just pay attention now." you don't realize how often you hear Charles Manson referenced, but you're gonna start noticing it in magazines and TV
Hmm.
shows. He was the boogeyman, for the last century. He was the epitome of evil, and that
Right.
was really thanks to
Any
Vince Bugliosi.
connection? Sorry, to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or
Oh yeah, they talked. Tarantino.
Oh, Tarantino, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We talked after he'd made the film, but he
Right.
was
okay,
writing a novelization of
Hmm.
the script, and then
right?
he finally, my book had gotten to him before his film came out, and before my book was published, but when we had a galley, but he was too busy to read it. I had two friends who were friends with him because he was releasing that film, but
Hmm.
a year or two later, he's in Israel locked down because he and his wife went there to visit her
Right.
family and they couldn't come back because of the COVID
Wow.
restrictions. And that's when he decided he had all that time to do the novel and then he read my book and starts calling me like in the middle of
That's
the night to
awesome.
ask me questions. It was fun, except, he was calling me to ask me questions and he did most of the talking, which
Were
was
you like, why did you make that ending that way? You
I
got it wrong.
yeah, that
I
I
love it.
never asked him about that, but I
Yeah.
probably should have. Maybe I'll have another
Yeah.
chance.
Well, I hope Chaos is going to be a documentary. Maybe, I don't know if
It
you can
is,
say.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's being made for Netflix. It's supposed to come out. It's supposed to come out not this past fall, the fall before,
Hmm.
then this fall, and now they're telling me maybe this winter.
Wow.
Okay.
I don't
Hey, that's cozy. Something to watch in the winter.
Wow.
know.
My other takeaway from the book is that I do believe that Manson was created in a lab basically, and obviously I don't know for sure, but it's almost like they created a monster to destroy an entire sense of comfort, even the American dream to some regard, even the destruction of the family, which is weird to me because they called it the family, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that was all on purpose, but it was used in a way to be like, we're going to destroy America. Is like, I think you mentioned this in the book, or you said it in an interview, but Joan Didion said famously, America died on August 9th, right?
I think she said that, she woke up and she got a call about the murders the day of, and, she famously lived in LA
Right.
then. And she said that's when she knew that the 60s had ended. It was like
Right.
symbolic of the violence, the overindulgence and freedom. And I don't think she was making a moral judgment. She was just
No.
saying it had to lead to something like this.
Right. Yeah, it's the culmination, and she obviously I don't think was thinking this, but it seems to me like the culmination of what was going on in Laurel Canyon.
Yeah.
And have you read the weird scenes inside the canyon?
Yeah, I mean, I know people always want me to reference that book.
Right.
He was dead, when I finally got it. McGowan.
Yeah, yeah,
I would
yeah.
have loved to have talked to him. The problem is he doesn't source a lot of his information.
I know.
And I'm really careful to do that. So I got
Yep.
frustrated with the book, and it was a long time ago that I actually read it.
Yep.
But there were too many leaps of faith that he was asking the reader to go along with.
Agreed.
But there's good stuff in there. I mean, there's good reporting. But yeah,
It-
that's what she was talking
It's
about.
it is pretty good, but yeah, there's lots of things where you're just like, well, I'm easily, it could be this or that, and that's a big leap of faith. But it's interesting, it's a good diving board into what was going on and may or may not have been going on in Laurel Canyon with
Yeah,
Mountain Look
he did it before
Observatory.
me, so I give him credit because it's not easy to get that kind of narrative out there in the world.
Yeah.
People don't want to publish that stuff.
Yeah. So hopefully we get a second book from you on this
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, I mean, I haven't committed to it yet, but I'm pretty close to committing. I just want to make sure I have enough answers this time.
Yeah.
And all I'm doing is work. I mean, I thought I'd stop, but it's been 5 years, and I work every day trying to get more and more information. So if I don't do a second book, it'll almost be. I can't remember if we were talking about it on camera or off. Joseph Mitchell.
That was right
But
before,
with
yeah.
The second book, with the second
yeah.
book was never published.
Yeah, for those who don't know Joseph Mitchell, it's a great writer who never finished his magnum opus, I guess, that took him 40 years and then he died and never published it again, anything actually for those years. But I'm really looking
every
forward.
writer's biggest
Oh.
fear is that they're never going to finish or publish whatever they're working on for so long that they pretty much dedicate their life to.
Right. Well, you get swallowed by these insane stories, and it's
Yeah,
hard to leave.
yeah.
And then I'm like I think you said publicly, once you publish something like this, you're then inundated by people who have information or think they have information.
Yeah.
Like I was saying to you earlier, in my serial killer reporting, I call them grief whores. There's people who like attach themselves to the story. They have no reason of being involved, but they've attached themselves because they like being around this like psychotic grief stuff. You have to weed them out.
Yeah,
I'm sure you've experienced a few of those.
Reporters were saying, "Give us Rex," or "We want Rex." What did?
Yeah. So when they finally apprehended who they believed to be the Long Island serial killer, I went to the courtroom to see him appear before the judge, and it took a while for him to come out in cuffs. He's this giant man. And so while it was taking so long, I'm sitting in the courtroom surrounded by all like the corporate press types, and they're dressed nice and they're writing for local news stations. They started chanting, "We want Rex."
That's amazing. That's like a scene from a Day of the Locust movie or something.
Oh yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that. It is. It reminded me of people, barbecuing and selling merchandise outside of Ted Bundy's execution.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It says a lot about the. It's so much like in Chaos. You learn so much about the dark side of the authorities, the actual evil that's being perpetrated, the audience, people who think they know stuff, the media. Yeah. It says it's a symbol for America. That's why I think your book is so important, and I really thank you for writing it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
I thank you for joining us tonight. I feel like I could talk to you for a very long time about all this stuff, but we will let you go, and I hope people find Chaos. If you haven't read this book, please find it. It is literally one of my favorite books. I recommend it all the time. I bought it for people for Christmas.
I just bought it for Father's Day. I'm not supposed to say that on air.
Yeah, it's a great Christmas gift.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm like ruining people's Christmases by this very dark story, but I think it's important.
I'm happy.
Yeah, I really do think it's very important, and it's a great way for people to be introduced to a lot of nefarious things that are happening, and good questions to be asking about yourself, the government, the media, authorities, everything. So, Tom, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Tom.
And
thank you guys for having me. That was fun. I mean, fun, but it was fun.
It was a really fun talk.
It's just great to get asked questions by informed people who kind of understand it.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, we'll have to do it again at some point when you have your second book out. Hopefully, not too long from now.
Hopefully, we'll be alive. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have you back. But thank you very much, and until next time.
Bye, Tom.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, man. Oh man, that was incredible. Seriously,
that was great.
One of my legit one of my favorite writers. And
he was awesome.
He's done so much for people getting plugged into the idea that the government is not who they say they are.
Yeah.
Shocking, because we talk about it a lot. I write about it a lot, and it's hard for me. I go to like my kids' birthday parties, and it's people ask me what I do, and I'm like, all of a sudden, I'm talking about MK Ultra and Charles Manson. I'm talking about all this ridiculous stuff.
I'm like, it's not really my thing, but now I can't sleep at night. So.
Yeah, sorry. Nancy's like, you gotta, we're at a children. I'm like, these people need to know, Nance. All right, I need to know who I can hang out with or not. But Tom did such a great job in that book of making the audience, question for themselves without beating over the head with what he thinks is the answer. Yeah. Which is what everyone else tries to do. Yeah. Not everyone, but when the corporate press or read Vincent Bugliosi's book.
That's a terrible.
It's a hard name to look into, but it's worth reading his stuff as well to see what they think the official narrative is. It's worth looking at the corporate press to see what they're saying, because you have to piece all these things together for yourself.
Yeah, and even then,
And even then,
still gotta be skeptical.
It's wild. So we should get to callers, and before we do that, I'll read a story though.
Okay.
Actually, I have a story someone sent me to read.
Okay.
So hey, we've been live with. I should knock on wood.
Oh yeah, no. The ghosts are not with us tonight. I said a little prayer on my way here.
Oh, good. Yeah, me too. So I got this great story. It's gonna take me a few minutes to read, but it's worth reading. Let me find it.
You take your time, Shane.
So it's called The Story of Steve the Elf. Let me just make sure I'm reading from the right. So this should take a few minutes, but this person said to read it.
Okay.
So I'll read it. Okay. Get comfortable. Have you ever been around an object or in a room that made you feel uneasy? Some say it is a sixth sense humans possess to respond to danger. The feeling of being watched, the feeling that gives you goosebumps and makes hair on your body stand up in attention. There have been, that's creepy. There have only been a few times I felt this in my life, and this is the story of one of those times. I've never told the story to anybody before. I've only started recalling memories again recently. This was a situation I've tried to erase from my memory because it was so disturbing to me, and I still can't explain it other than via the realm of demonic possession. Interesting that we're talking about memory replacement after we just talked about MK Ultra and the things they did. And we didn't talk about. there's so much more I want to say about. We'll finish the story before I get into Jack Ruby again, and brainwashing. Many years ago, my son was around 3 years old. He told my wife and I that he wanted one of Santa's elves in a plushie, like a stuffed animal, for Christmas. I decided to give eBay a shot since you can usually find mint condition or even brand new toys on there for cheap. I found a well-made elf plush and described as new condition in the perfect size. The package arrived a few days later.
Oh no, is this a Chucky story?
When I first opened the package and held the elf, something seemed a bit off. Again, it's that strange sense I described above, but just a little tingle. I didn't think much of it at this point. I decided it would be good to go ahead and give my son the elf early since Christmas was less than a month away. My son was over the moon with excitement to get his elf early and couldn't wait to be tucked in with him that night. He decided to name him Elfie, the elf. Each night for the next several nights, I would tuck Elfie in with my son, both with their heads on the pillow and body under the covers. On about 3 or 4 after giving, on the morning 3 or 4 after giving my son Elfie, I started noticing Elfie was nowhere in the bed come the next morning. I'd either notice him in my son's closet or all the way across the room. I asked my son why Elfie wasn't in the bed, and he told me he didn't want him in the bed with him anymore. He told me he was throwing Elfie out of the bed in the middle of the night. I picked up Elfie again and looked the doll straight in the eyes, this time making me feel more uneasy than before. It's difficult to describe the feeling, but you'll know if you experience it. Was this what my son was also picking up on? Children are supposed to be more attuned to these kinds of forces after all. Again, I continue to ignore the sense because I figured it's just my mind playing tricks on me, of course, right? The next night I go to tuck my son in. I place Elfie on the bed with him instead of tucking them in together. My son immediately throws Elfie across the room and says, "I don't want him anymore." So I ask, "Why don't you want Elfie in your bed anymore?" He replies, "He's not Elfie. His name is Steve." Steve? The elf told you his name is Steve? My son nods in agreement. I leave Elfie, or Steve, on the floor where he was thrown, saying goodnight and leaving the room confused. I go downstairs to my computer, sitting there wondering how my son is imagining all this. After all, dolls can't talk, right? And how did he come up with Steve? Out of all the possible names, something tells me to look up my eBay order history for Elfie. When I read the text on the computer monitor, I almost felt like my heart stopped for a full 3 seconds. One of Santa's elves, Steve the elf, in the description from the eBay seller. I'm now in a panic, our reader says. I go back into my son's room, grab the doll off the floor, and say another goodnight. I take the doll downstairs to immediately get it out of my house. I look all over the doll, and there is no marking or label anywhere that would indicate his name was Steve. Even if there were, my 3-year-old child wouldn't be able to read the label yet anyway. I look straight into the eyes of the doll again, and I cannot describe the feeling of dread that came completely over my body, like it knew it was discovered and the jig was up. Just being in the presence of this object made me feel like I was in danger. I'm currently getting chills and goosebumps all over my body as I'm typing this, and visualizing the face of the doll over again. Took the doll straight to the trash can outside and finally felt a sense of relief as the lid slammed closed. That was the last I ever saw of Steve, except in the memories forever burned into my mind. I would say you should have burned it.
New fear unlocked.
I know, right? That was crazy. Like the finding, I'm trying to think, like, is there a possibility the parents maybe said Steve at some point?
Wait, so they threw the doll away and that was that?
So I never saw it again. Never saw it again.
Need more?
I once had, I was in a crazy relationship a long time ago with a lady who collected gnomes. And when we broke up, it was like, I was like, oh, thank God. I went to the supermarket. Did you take a gnome with you? I went to the supermarket. I remember getting lunch at the time. I had this job right next to near the supermarket. So I stopped there to get my lunch to go into work with, and parked, went in, got my lunch, came out, and I noticed right in front of my car on the curb was a little gnome.
Oh, did she stalk you or follow you?
She might have. I don't know.
Like, take me with you, Shane.
I don't know, but it was super weird that happened. So
that's
I get it.
And gnomes are like weird to begin with. So
no, like all of us, like why?
Yeah,
why?
Really
it was probably my federal agent watching me at the time. They've been watching me for so long. So he's like, we're just gonna mess with Shane here. So let's get to our callers.
Oh, cool. I think let's see who we have.
Who we got?
Am I the only one? But let me see if they're there.
Let's do it.
Brian.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Man, Tom was awesome.
He was great.
So cool that we got to the memory replacement stuff. I was going to say, like, we didn't get into it too much, but that guy, Jolly West, was allowed into Jack Ruby's, like, hospital. Oh. And that's the guy who shot Lee Harvey, right? Lee Harvey Oswald. So they were, he went psychotic after this guy visited his room. And that's the guy who I said is like the Scarecrow from Batman. So it's just very, very bizarre that this guy, you know, and that's also the guy who involved the Lackland.
Brian? Oh my gosh.
Oh Lord.
Brian?
Brian got gremlins. Oh Lord.
Oh my God. Hold on. Something's happening.
All right. So it's only an hour and 9 minutes in, and we got our first gremlin. That sounded like an actual gremlin.
I mean, you're just
Brian, sorry if you can hear us. We couldn't hear you. We heard you, but you were highly distorted.
Are you still with us?
My computer was on, so sometimes.
Okay. Put it in the waiting room. Hold on.
That's pretty bad.
How to get him out of there?
I don't know.
He's blowing everyone's ears out.
Wow. Maybe try have him leave and come back.
Yeah, I took him out.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Okay.
So, all right, not so bad. An hour and 10 until we experience our first issue. While we wait for him, I'll say another story real quick.
Okay.
Hopefully he can come back. You know, maybe have him leave and come back and check his volume on his phone or something.
All right.
Now that I've been doing this and people have been watching and people I know in my life are like, oh, you're doing the show. People are calling in. I've been hearing a lot more of these stories. And this lady I know, I've known her for a few years now. She's just like a lot of people. They'll say, I don't really believe in a lot of this weird stuff, but I've experienced something weird. And she's like, you might not be my friend after you hear the story. I'm like, oh, trust me, I've heard crazy things. It's all good. She was like, well, she heard about the guy from last week who was a gray alien in his past life, supposedly, okay. Mark. She was like, I believe, she said, I was hypnotized by this guy, which is weird because Mark
was hypnotized.
Yeah. And again, I've known her for years. We've never had these types of conversations before. She was like, I was hypnotized by this guy, and I was all of a sudden on a spaceship with like tall gray. She called them like demons, which I think is fair. And she's like, I never told anybody this, but it always bothered me. And she's a lot into like we'll call it like woo type of therapy, you know, like go into like I don't want to say it's not a therapist, but it's like kind of like a shaman, perhaps.
Okay.
I think there's even a better word for that, but we'll call it a shaman. But the shaman was like this is years after she was hypnotized and saw herself on a spaceship, never told anyone the story. And the shaman was doing some type of practicing something on her where she was removing what they thought were entities inside of her. Okay. And the woman said, you have been pregnant with a tall gray type of beast. And according to the shaman lady, was pulling it out of like her stomach. Yeah, you obviously couldn't see anything, but like she was like, I have never told anyone about those tall gray people that I saw on that ship, and now this lady is pulling out this
tall gray baby,
tall gray demon baby. What? Which is so weird because of like we're talking about Rosemary's Baby and stuff. And have you read that book or seen the movie?
I've seen the movie. Yeah. I was pregnant and we watched it.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Wow. Nancy,
is that weird? I don't know.
Nancy was pregnant with our second.
I felt like I read the book for the first time. We had to watch it.
It's so crazy. I mean, oh my goodness. How are we doing with the caller?
I don't know. Let's see.
Let's try it.
Brian. You see, he keeps popping out.
Brian, are you there? Oh no.
Nope. Brian, are you with us?
He's there. For those watching, we're trying. For those listening, we are trying.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but you're very blown out. We can't hear. It's all very distorted. So we might have to.
Sounds like he's in the car. I had to like take him out again.
Yeah. Well, can you pull up a story?
Sure.
Look up goblins in Africa. I want to read this. If you can, when you find it and pull it up on the monitor. Have you heard the story about the goblins perhaps terrorizing this African village? Did it come up?
A couple of things. Oh my God.
Let's pull up.
This is what dreams
what
are
the
made
options?
of. Nightmares are made of.
Yeah. I feel like they might be connected to the ones coming here.
Something like this?
Yeah, let's see. What do they say? Is there an article we can read or? Well, while you find the article, there's a village in Africa that has supposedly been terrorized by goblins, and some people say they were like getting raped by goblins. It's pretty alarming.
Horror news.
Let's try it. My thought when I read this though was that it was like the story we talked about in our first or second episode, the people in I believe Peru who believed they were being attacked by aliens.
This is like a story here.
What do we got? Are goblins real?
Yeah.
Is this after? Well, let's read this one first.
Okay.
I heard about this bizarre story and couldn't just ignore it. Where's this from, first of all?
Horror news.
From Horror News. I heard about this bizarre story and just couldn't ignore it. This is one of the strangest things I've read in quite some time. I'm not sure that I personally know anyone who believes in goblins, but in Africa, that's another story. It seems that the culture feeds on this type of mythology. It's real to those people, and maybe it is real. I'm not going to be ignorant towards the apparent goblin problem. I'm open to believe. Who wrote it? Do we have like a name? It's uncategorized. All right, let's go down. So yeah, let's read this part.
The incident?
Yeah. The incident occurred about 8 p.m. on Wednesday. And this is recent goblin news.
Okay.
A family that claimed a lodger owned the goblin brought... Okay, a family that claimed a lodger owned the goblin brought it to the station in a suitcase. I can read.
No, it's the writing.
The writing is weird, right?
Yeah.
We heard some screaming. This is a quote now. We heard some screaming from the charge office, and most officers who had knocked off rushed to see what was happening. At first, everyone gathered around the suitcase, wanting to see what was inside, said a cop. The officer said a traditional healer who had come with the family opened the suitcase, and a weird-looking creature jumped out of a bottle that was filled with blood. No one told anyone it was time to run. 1 minute, the charge office was full. The next, it was empty. I think some people went out through the windows because we could not all have fitted through the door. Fat cops and slim cops all ran. How is this real?
I know.
Police officers gave different versions about how the goblin looked. Some said it looked like, and this is written so poorly, like a snake with the head of a dog, and others said it was a dog with scales like a pangolin. Haven't seen that word in a while. That's early COVID lore. They all agreed that it smelt terribly. S-M-E-L-T, it's spelled. The traditional
My 3-year-old wrote this.
Yeah. But yeah, people were saying they were seeing goblins. I'm so curious how this story is going to turn out.
But like what, like looking like
by the way, there's a giant like black
there's a
bird
goblin?
that keeps flying up to the window. I don't know if people have seen that
like a
in the shadow. Yeah, like a crow. So yeah, I don't know like what the goblins are up to over in Africa.
There's a video on YouTube. That's too much.
Let's try it.
Okay.
Let's try it. I hope we don't get rickrolled.
Oh my God.
Maybe you should make sure it's nothing like a rickroll before we go. We
share
it with the
supposed
audience.
To scan this thing? Right?
Yeah, it comes. Scan it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, let's see it. Is it like a news? Like
Blame
is it a reporter?
the Tokolashi, South Africa's most notorious goblin.
Oh, that's
this is from 4 years ago, though.
So there's a goblin problem for a long time. From what I've read, this town and people like in this culture like have a real problem with goblins, and they believe it. That doesn't look. Oh, that's a commercial. Oh my goodness. I'm like, what is that? Is that a goblin pole dancing? Don't make them watch this.
Oh my Lord.
Oh my goodness. Sorry guys.
We're just having fun tonight, you know?
Have you bought stuffed animals for your kids that you think are haunted?
We've had we have 5,000
I know you've got some, but do you ever like...
yeah, but you know what? My mother-in-law gave us like an old Elmo and an old like Bert and Ernie, whatever, and that stuff. It's like it's not even like it needs new batteries. It's like it's something's going on with it. It's very strange.
So the thing that scared me the most growing up I was in a farm in the woods in the middle of nowhere, and the night was odd. And I remember watching Harry and the Hendersons. Oh yeah. And so Harry like really bothered, even though he was nice, he really bothered me. Yeah. And for those who haven't seen that, he's like a Sasquatch looking Bigfoot type character. So I always figured he'd be in the woods. And then the other thing that bothered me was Alf.
Yeah, Alf.
My parents bought me a stuffy Alf.
I used to have a stuffy Alf.
And I was probably 5 or 6 when this happened. I threw Alf in the closet. And he stayed there till I was in my like 20s.
Oh, you couldn't do
that? Yeah, he really upset me.
Wow.
He ate cats.
Oh.
Yeah. Did you ever watch this show?
Chris loves this show.
Oh,
Chris. He loves it. It's not for me. I definitely watched some of it growing up. Or how could you not?
It's crazy.
For those who grew up in the 80s.
Any luck with the callers?
Oh God! Well, you don't want to watch his goblins?
Oh yeah. If we have the goblin thing, pull it up. Yeah.
Let's see what happens here.
What
I turned the audio off.
So well, I'm not talking about Dracula, but something a little bit more mysterious: the Tokolosh.
The Tokolosh.
Often described as a goblin-like creature.
So this must be.
Its purpose is to cause mischief and hardship for humans.
What is this?
This notorious South African monster is blamed for everything from theft to divorce. Also called a tikolosh, many believe it is real, even elevating their beds off of the ground to avoid becoming a victim of this diminutive creature. The majority of people have never claimed to see one, but if something goes wrong in South Africa, you can bet a tokolosh is to blame.
You can pause it. it's so interesting about different people, different cultures and the things they fear, and like we have obviously ghosts in this culture and stuff like that. Goblins not so much. We have
I haven't really heard about goblins in a while.
Chupacabra in Mexico.
Yeah.
And I'm so curious how stories like this play out.
Loch
Like,
Ness
are we gonna?
Monster.
The reason I brought up the Peru thing is like we eventually found out that it was miners, MINERS, in like jetpacks of some sort, trying to, I don't know what they were doing, but are we gonna find out that there's just someone raiding this village? Are they back?
Oh yeah. Well, someone, our tech guy, one of our guys, said that there was like AC unit thing happening. That's why we couldn't. I don't
Okay.
know. We'll see.
Let's try it again.
Brian.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh my God. You're very loud.
Oh,
Hey,
sorry.
Brian,
Hold on.
Are you talking on the phone or?
Yeah, you're a little like you're blown out. I'm just trying to see if I can lower.
No, I'm on like a headset, a gaming headset. Is that any better?
Nope, you're very loud.
It is a little better, but do you mind maybe trying not the headset? It might be distorting your voice.
Alright, let's see. One more headset.
Okay. I don't know.
Is that any better? One more headset?
No.
Okay. In the waiting
Sorry.
room.
Yep.
It
That's
must
too
be on
bad.
our end.
Yeah.
Or
Was he our
something.
only guy tonight?
Yes.
That's crazy.
I know.
Oh,
See,
man.
it's always something.
You know
Shane.
what? I'm glad it happened now.
I know.
And not earlier. But so
Okay.
you bought what? You're gonna try again?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Let's
Sorry,
talk about.
Brian.
I want to talk more about chaos.
Let's talk about chaos.
I want to talk about mind control and like I really think that I know Tom didn't want to speculate too much, and I get that, but I'm here to speculate. I think mind control has evolved into, they've infiltrated social media. We know they infiltrate the news, and that these people want to create realities that they want you to believe in. Like
Can you give me 1 second?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I know
Yeah.
we can get back to this. I just want to try this one more.
Yeah, try it.
Brian, I'm giving you one more shot. Are you there?
Is that any
No.
better?
I lowered you, but you sound like you're underwater.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Sorry,
Sorry, it didn't
brother.
work out, Brian. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. The Bugliosi stuff should really scare people. I
Yeah.
mean, Manson's obviously terrifying that this happened, that
Yeah.
he was able to basically coerce, puppeteer people to do his murders. And the fact that he might have been, and I believe he was created by stuff like MK Ultra. But beyond all that, the Bugliosi thing is
But
insane.
he's dead now.
Bugliosi's dead.
Okay, so
So
what are
that's
we
the
scared about?
that's the prosecutor who put Manson away.
Yeah.
Right. Who wrote Helter Skelter, one of the most best-selling books there is out there. All these true crime awards, and that's like the official narrative about the Manson case that Tom subverts with all of his reporting. Right. In terms of lying, suppressing evidence, or people who Manson was in jail. And then let out, and he was breaking parole. Like how did that happen? Stuff like that. So the Bugliosi thing, I mean, this is something that's so important for people, and it's something that parallels a lot of my reporting for the Long Island serial killer case, which we talked about a few episodes ago. The authorities are so deranged. Obviously, not all of them.
Yeah.
But in so many cases, it's like you can't trust anyone when these things, and that's why I asked Tom about. How do you discern information?
Yeah.
Because you don't even know what you're getting is right.
Yeah.
And there's a part in his book where he's saying, there's like some police or investigators saying, if you give me this information, we'll get back to you the second we have more information. And he felt in his gut maybe he shouldn't, and he did, and then they just disappeared.
Right.
And then he's getting no more insights. And there's a constant like cloud of like conspiracy, corruption happening behind the scenes that's just as evil, if not more so, than the evil that's on the headlines, right? And like Bugliosi, this guy, I mean, he only told you a little bit, but he like the milkman was, he believed, sleeping with his wife. He stalked him. It's so scary that those people exist and that they're in so much power, and running for office like he was. Right. He was trying, I forget what he was trying to be. Maybe running for mayor or something, but he was running for office, which is when those stories broke out, being like, hey, this guy's a madman. Maybe don't elect this person because he's a psychopath,
right?
Which is insane because he was so famous, right? And people have this idea of him like, well, how can he have been so bad if he was so popular? You know, how could I get away? How could he get away with this stuff? But in my mind, is he get away with it because he's protected by a system of compartmentalization and other people who are just as bad as him. Yeah. I'm not saying everyone in that world, in the authorities, is bad, but I think a lot of them might be, at least the ones in power. And like, you know, I've said before about the serial killer case I've been writing about, the commissioner and I believe he was the chief both went to prison. Yeah. While the investigation was going on. And there's so many stories about them being involved in crazy, possibly satanic orgies in that town where those women were found. And that's just one thing, right? Yeah. So I just urge people to read that book. And I also agree with him on the weird scenes inside the canyon. It's a great book, but it's very tangential. Yeah. But it's great. It's a great starting place for people who want to see like what I see as the beginning of what would culminate into Manson at the end of the 60s. Because it's basically, his thesis is the counterculture is infiltrated by people within the government. You know, he makes a lot of connections that are true, but it's hard to know if those connections amount to anything.
I mean, could it just be like he wanted to start a cult?
Well, Manson, I think, in my mind, did just want to start a cult. Yeah, you know, kind of like the CIA.
So that's why they used him.
Want to start a cult. But I think him starting the cult might have been a consequence of symptoms of the MK Ultra.
It's all connected in some way.
I think it's weird because you have to parse through all the coincidences and all the conspiracies and all like everyone has a different angle on it.
How do you get to a point of like creating MK Ultra? Like how you're in this position, you're just like, yeah, let's just create this thing because we can fuck with people's minds.
Like Tom was saying, we don't really know yet. At least I don't know if we know that we were doing it before the 50s, before like Operation Paperclip. Like so that's when we brought in all the Nazis that were scientists and we hired them. And I just started reading the Sidney Gottlieb book, who basically oversaw MK Ultra. And I'm not to the point yet where they're saying all this, but I believe it's building to the point where we talk about biowarfare researchers that were Nazis who were hired and brought on. We started doing all these experimentations on people. So I think we bring in people to experiment, and you know, Tom's one possible argument would be like to learn how to have these better soldiers and fight war, which I have a hard time thinking that's an actual good thing. Yeah, I don't know if it's good because it seems to always backfire. Whenever you try to like play God and manipulate people's brains, it doesn't work out.
I wouldn't think so.
It doesn't work out. And I think they want to, in this race to be the best military industrial complex, which is when all those things are accelerating. They were like, how do we create a super soldier? How do we create these Manchurian candidates? How do we infiltrate subcultures that are trying to subvert us and destroy them? You know, like I brought up COINTELPRO and Operation Chaos, and we learned through the church committee that there was all these secret operations going on that were infiltrating the subcultures like the anti-war movement, like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X and stuff like that. And I believe even people in the government recently were held accountable for Malcolm X's assassination. Yeah. You know, which is funny to me. It's not funny. It's depraved. But
I'm starting to think that everything is planned and everything is a conspiracy.
A lot of it is, and I have a hard time drawing that. Like, where's the line? You know, because I sort of said this to Tom, but like you can really get in the weeds of things when I'm talking about how the year before the Tate LaBianca murders, Roman Polanski did a movie called Rosemary's Baby, right? Yeah. That's a crazy movie. Yeah. The book is so insane. It's one of my favorite like horror novels. It's a scary book. Yeah.
It's a scary movie.
It really is. And then so a year later, he's in London working on a movie he never did because of the murders called Day of the Dolphin, where the book is about basically a mad scientist training dolphins to assassinate the United States president, which is based on a novel, which is then based on a character in real life. Like he said, I believe John Lilly is the name, who was one of these scientists, like Jolly West, who were working with LSD and experimenting on humans and brains and building these types of super soldiers. So all that's happening, and then it's just so bizarre that like there's those things in the culture already, and then Manson, and then he uses like it just is it coincidence? Yeah, I don't know. It's just that's a far reach though to go that deep into the details and think that there's something more to it, because that's like true evil planning.
It's not enough for me. I feel like I need more reasoning.
Oh, well, in terms of reasoning, I think they created someone. I don't know if Manson was just a backfire or an experiment gone wrong, or if he was unleashed to destroy this idea of American innocence.
Yeah, but I mean, you could say this now about like anyone that's a serial killer.
Yeah, I think there was something about murdering celebrities in Beverly Hills, and like it wasn't just celebrities. It was like I think the heiress or the heir or both of Folgers Coffee.
Okay.
You know, like these like institutions, like Rosemary's Baby is obviously a popular film. They seem like it seemed like even people who feel like they should be protected by everything because their money and their wealth and their stardom, they're not safe.
Yeah.
That's why I feel like they were targeted. Like I feel like all these people were targeted by Manson and whoever was pulling the strings to send a message that would ripple across, because it changed like the subconscious of America, from what I've heard.
Yeah.
Right. In the same way that
because of Sharon Tate ultimately, or
well,
just
Tate, her being pregnant.
Yeah.
You know, like Helter Skelter was basically arguing that this was to incite a race war. You
Right.
know? And it was like, that's why they wrote Pig, and Manson had this idea that they did talk about at Spawn Ranch about we're going to create racial division and basically destroy everyone while they'll be underground and emerge to repopulate Earth. Right. It was like this very weird dystopian, I don't know what religion, cult, obviously. Yeah. But what Tom is saying is perhaps that's not the full story.
Yeah.
And maybe that was applied to Manson to create a certain image. And my thing is like, I really believe MK Ultra was being used and he was a victim of it. And he was like this monster created by it, as are others. But on top of that, I believe it was a symbol about the death of America in many ways. And the 60s were just a system of symbolic deaths for the country, like
but we're
JFK's
still
assassination.
Kind of going through that.
I think we're now in like, if the 60s, like I was saying, with weird scenes inside of Laurel Canyon where they the CIA supposedly infiltrated the counterculture in Laurel Canyon, where they had Mountain Overlook Observatory in Laurel Canyon, where they supposedly filmed all these like propaganda films, and big stars and starlets would go to film this stuff to kind of engineer a narrative about America and celebrity and the audience, and you know what the dream is and all these things. All that culminates into, in my opinion, the murders, the Tate LaBianca murders. And then we could zoom out more, and I would say that perhaps we're in that evolution of that depravity and CIA infiltrating subversive groups right now with digital media.
So it's finally working?
Oh, I think there is mass hypnosis happening. I think whatever they learned in MK Ultra and how to replace memories and how to dose people, I fully believe that they found a way to do it remotely with technology or with drugs or with the food you eat. Who knows? I do think that. Like when I'm talking about the mass murders, and you know, Tom was saying when he sees certain mass shootings or these horrible crimes happen, he can't help but think about it, and then people hit him up being like, "Oh, what do you think?" It could just be people are insane, you know, and that happens. But when you know these things, it's kind of like what I say when people talk about false flags, right? And that's, false flags are real.
Yeah.
We know the Joint Chiefs of Staff presented Operation Northwoods to JFK, which was to turn violence on the American citizens and then blame that on Cuba to start a war. So when you know these things happen, it's hard to then not apply that
to everything.
To everything. But you have to be careful because it's not everything.
And you also can't really prove it.
I mean, not yet, but it's hard to know, because I think what we learned in the church committee is only the surface. Yeah. You know, like like Tom was saying, they got rid of a lot of the MK Ultra files. We don't even have all of them because they destroyed them all, supposedly. Right. So it's hard to know. But I think we're in the evolution of this hypnosis brainwashing campaign for control, for power, for greed, to create chaos, no pun intended. But that's to me, it seems like that's the case. You know, you look at how social media, we were talking last week with Ian Carroll about fake realities. This to me is a part of that. This is the engine of that. This is like, they create these false narratives and fear to control people. And I think it's even down to little things. And this could be crazy. I could just be crazy. But it's down to little things. Even like, I was just talking about this yesterday on Twitter. memes where people are divided over a meme, like the blue dress, gold dress thing.
Right.
Like that wasn't to me, and that could be crazy, is a form of perception control and challenging one's perception, and people doing it en masse and being like, you're looking at the same thing but seeing something different. That's very interesting, and I'm sure it's interesting to people who are studying psychology and perception. They didn't stop.
Yeah.
They didn't stop doing this stuff. They kept doing it for
Just
sure.
doing it in a different way.
And you know that guy who took the picture of the dress murdered his wife.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It's crazy.
Was she in the dress?
She wasn't in the dress, but the picture was, I think, just of the dress.
Okay.
But
she was in there.
Yeah, imagine. And again, it could just be crazy stuff. And this is why I was asking Tom, like, about the idea of paranoia. You know, it's hard to know when to stop. You have to keep yourself tethered to whatever your sense of reality is. You have to have an anchor to something, because you can drift away from all this stuff. And like, I know that from my reporting with the serial killer stuff, when you're in so deep, you're like, how do I even get out of this? It's like, now you're looking at the chief of police is a possible murderer, like the commissioner is corrupt.
You also got to be careful, because you don't know where this is going to lead for you, and you might end up off grid, honestly.
I might have to at some point, honestly.
Well, you're in West Virginia, so you're almost there.
But there's no such thing as off grid anymore, because they have
because they can find you anywhere.
They've got satellites mapping
Drones.
the Earth at all times. So
Jeez.
It's wild, but there's nothing you can do other than keep yourself, I think, informed. You know, someone might say to me, well, I'd rather be ignorant of all this.
Sometimes I feel that way, honestly.
You do?
Yeah.
I don't. Like, I would rather know and be on the cusp of paranoia.
Really?
And knowing that I should be hopefully in control of it.
Yeah.
And knowing that, like, there is a line that you could go too far in terms of being a paranoid schizophrenic to some degree. But I think I would rather know that there are so many evil forces out there trying to manipulate my sense of reality, and also trying to hurt my children in their sense of reality, right? In all forms,
right?
Media, food, you name it.
See, but I can't live that way.
No,
I just can't. No, because I want to live my life, you know, and my kids have to also, and I'm raising small children. And,
Well, that's why you got to be the anchor to people who.
You know, you just keep me posted, Shane.
I know. I also know it's hard to have these conversations all the time with people you're close with, because it drives people crazy.
Oh, I refuse to almost have them with anybody, except for, like, you know, people close to me, because, I mean, people are just crazy. You know, even family, like, they don't want to hear it. And, you know, if you don't have all your facts in check, God, forget it.
You should see me at parties. But that for me, it's like
I'm gonna bring you to my next party. I'm like, instead of a clown, we have Shane.
To me, it's a process of elimination to be like, well, who can I let my kids be around? Like, are you plugged in to how deranged the world is?
But that's hard, because I mean, I got family members, and I'm like, we probably should just cut ties. And at the same time, it's just like, well, but you're my family, so what do you do?
Yeah, it's not healthy for everyone to know, but I also wonder if more people knew about this, if it would help stop it. You know, because because people live in ignorance. They just do. They don't want to know either. Yeah. Really, the majority. You know, it's hard to know, and it's scary, because this stuff with Manson and the CIA is like, that's surface almost.
Yeah.
Like, you're going below, but there's so much darker stuff going on.
I mean, you can't even get people to not watch corporate press.
I know. It's tough. They have become the authority on quote unquote truth.
Right.
So it's really hard to break that spell.
Yeah.
Speaking of spells, Charles Manson,
yeah.
MK Ultra, you know, and I think that's an extension of the mind control campaign, which is scary, but it's the reality we occupy. And it's not just us doing it. We obviously hired Nazis because they were doing it. And we gave immunity to the Japanese, who were doing Unit 731, human experimentations like vivisection on people, and freezing people's hands and putting them in isolation tanks to figure out how to wash their minds completely. You know, and I think we said this off camera with Tom, but like there was entire places, I think it was a big place in Canada, where we're just inducing comas in people for months to see if we could just wipe the slate clean.
Yeah.
Tabula rasa, I believe, is what it means. To have a clean slate, and just see if what can we build back with you.
I would like to have a reset button. in this country, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff's gonna have to end unless they have it their way. Their reset button is
Yeah, I mean, it's
really
like, whose
bad.
reset button are we talking about here?
Right, you got to be really careful with the reset button.
Yeah.
But that is what I think they're trying to do. I think they're trying to sever your sense of reality so they have a better control of you over fear.
And I think we're getting further away. I know last week we were talking about it with Ian Carroll and like, you know, the more we talk about it, the more people know and all this. But I think we're getting further away.
I hope so. I think the fact that more people are thinking about this, and like they don't have to make it their identity, because
Yeah.
like I said, you get carried away.
Yeah.
You know, like there's a lot of theories out there where people just start seeing things that aren't there, because it's hard when you're connecting all these dots that are easy to connect. Like you can see documents or like this is that. You can spin out of control. I've been there with these like true crime stories and all these corrupt politicians and police officers. It's easy to get there, but like we were talking with Ian, like with the success of Tom's book, with the success that Ian has with his live streams where he's just going through documents. There's a real hunger out there for people to be like, I want reality.
Yeah.
Or at least I want to know the other side of this reality, right?
I don't know.
I think they're saying that maybe Brian switched devices.
Oh.
So
Let's see, Brian. Okay, I'm scared. Okay, everybody, hold your ears. Okay, ready? Should I bring him in?
let's try it.
Oh, I think we might have Chris Carr too.
What?
Maybe. I see someone that looks very familiar.
Sick.
Brian. Oh, you're jumping out. Brian.
Is that better?
Maybe turn him up a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Hold on.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're just gonna try turning up a little bit, and maybe that is better. I did hear a tiny voice in the distance.
Oh God. Oh God. No. Jesus.
Just bear with us, people.
Yeah, you got to give me a second here. Come on. Okay. Can we? Brian, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
All right,
Okay.
Brian.
Yep.
Thank you for waiting.
No problem.
Appreciate-
Sorry for the
Oh, it's all good,
problems on
man.
my-
All good. So let's hear it. What are you experiencing in this rather wild world we occupy?
So I'm originally from Niagara Falls, New York. There's some famous hauntings in that area: Fort Niagara, Love Canal, Buffalo Naval Park, and downtown terminal. So a few years ago, my dad passed in January of 2009. So my wife and I flew back home, stayed in my childhood home that my parents purchased on the day I was born. My dad always had a habit of sleeping on his couch. And when we stayed in the house, my wife slept on my dad's couch and I slept upstairs.
Okay.
So my dad was always the first person to get up every morning. And the first night that we stayed in the house, she was complaining of pain in her elbow. And my dad was famous for having rheumatoid arthritis and elbow pain. So she felt like she was pressed into the couch when she was sleeping. And, she had that pain all night. And then the first thing in the morning, we heard where all the spoons and stuff were, the silverware. We heard that drawer pull out, and I heard it upstairs. And the chair where my dad would sit was pulled out by something. We don't know what it was, but obviously we think my dad was still visiting the house and just repeating, his morning routine.
Whoa.
Weird.
That's wild. I knew someone who slept on the couch. Well, it's a very father thing from
To do.
the 80s, 90s. And where did you say that was?
That was in June of 2009.
And what state?
New York, Niagara Falls.
Oh, you said Niagara Falls, right. That's right. Oh, yeah. There's some interesting stories about people who went over the falls in barrels. I think there's some people who just disappeared altogether. Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
That's
And then
crazy.
my mom, she died 18 months later in January of 2011.
Right.
My sister-in-law lives in the house now, and she still gets the smell of my mom's perfume from time to time out of nowhere.
Whoa.
And when she was pregnant with what would have been my mom's first granddaughter, she could feel like a hand on her belly.
What?
during the pregnancy. So
that's weird.
Yeah, it wasn't anything malevolent. She just felt like my parents were still there, and they're not they're not gone. They're just still in the house.
Wow. So it was comforting.
Yeah. No, they're comforted by it. I think it's slowed down a little bit now because it's been a few years, but in the first 2-3 years since they died, it was happening all the time. But now that it's gone a little bit further, it's slowed down.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting how there can be different types of hauntings.
I was gonna say we've never really had a comforting spirit.
A comforting one, yeah. Yeah, we had the story of the dream.
Oh, the dream with them.
But it led to like a sort of be able to have a positive
somber
goodbye. But this is some type of comforting feeling. And it's kind of like, in a way, the story I was telling in I think first or second episode about my grandfather, who I believe is my grandfather with the lights after he passed away. You know, it was kind of like hey, I'm still here. I'm watching over grandma. You know, but who knows? That's wild. Those are great stories. I appreciate that.
I had one other one. I don't know if you have time.
Let's hear it.
My wife was very sensitive to the paranormal. Me, not so much, but I could be dragged into it. So I used to work in a resistor. We used to make resistors for computers and missiles and the defense systems. So I was working like a third shift at my computer, had my headphones on, not paying attention to anything, and I could feel something tap me on my shoulder. Of course, I turned around, and all I heard was like sneakers running down the hallway. Now, there were 3 people in the building when we were all in the same room, so something was in that room. I happened to find out later that we were on an Indian burial ground. The building was on an Indian burial ground.
Oh, boy.
So I invited my wife to come bring dinner one night. We go to walk. I bring her into the building. We walk to the cafeteria, and as we turn the corner, my wife stops, and she's like, "Do you see that little girl standing at the other end of the hallway?" So she had seen a full body apparition standing there, and as soon as she acknowledged it, it took off and ran. And she came and visited me multiple times, and like almost every time she was there, she said she could see that spirit. But that would be what would have tapped me on the shoulder.
So your wife sees this often, like everywhere she goes?
She did. She passed away a few years ago as well. But yeah, she did. She always got, she was always sensitive to it, so she could tell me. And then, but that was the first time that like really, when I was there with her, that she was shocked by it, and like it stopped her dead cold. Because I was like 2 seconds behind her, and she just stopped dead cold and was freaked out. We had to go outside and eat because she was so scared.
Wow, that's wild. Do you experience stuff now on your own?
I have. I had a roommate that I was living with I live out in Las Vegas now. I had a roommate that I was living with, who died through suicide, and he was a music fan, so I had my iPad in the kitchen.
Yep.
It was turned off. I'm watching TV, and all of a sudden, one of the bands that he always used to listen to came up on my iTunes. I wasn't listening to it. I wasn't playing it, but that scared the hell out of me because it just came out of nowhere. Like I'm sitting there watching TV, and boom, the song comes on.
Wow. That is wild. Yeah, it's weird when those things happen.
Yeah.
That is crazy. Yeah, Vegas is a strange haunted place too.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Real quick before we let you go, you said you were building missiles? What's that like?
we built the resistors that go into the network. So basically, I would program the laser to build resistance into the chips themselves.
Wow.
We did work for like everything. We did some military industrial stuff, but a lot of our stuff was in like commercial electronics as well. So,
Wow. A lot of people say, and maybe you've heard these stories about UFOs over places that might have missiles or places that make missile parts. Were there stories like that around there? Anyone else see the things you were seeing in terms of ghosts or other things extraterrestrial?
Well, the ghost stories at work were I wasn't the only one that experienced those things. So there were other people that had experiences, but those were the only ones that I personally was there for. So
Interesting. It's
No
kind of
aliens or
scary.
anything.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm sorry. What was that last part?
no aliens or anything back in
Okay.
Niagara Falls. I mean, I've had a few weird things out here in Vegas, but nothing.
Yeah. Well, you're in the desert.
Yeah.
There's a lot of weird things going on out there. Well, thank you so much for calling and telling us these stories.
So
We
glad it
appreciate
worked out, Brian.
Yeah. Thanks for the patience.
No problem. Thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye bye.
So we got someone else?
Do you want to take someone else?
Yeah.
It's Chris Carr.
Of course I want to take Chris Carr.
All right. Chris Carr, are you with us?
Mr. Carr.
Uh-oh. He's like, the children are up.
I'm so curious what Chris is going to say. That's crazy. A haunted place that's helping make missile parts
I guess.
scares me. Imagine a haunted missile.
That's really strange.
They're all haunted, honestly, if you ask me.
His mic is mute. He's like, I don't know how to use Discord.
Is he coming?
How do I don't know.
Hopefully we get Chris Carr in here. Nothing?
I don't know.
Well, for those who don't know, Chris Carr is my editor. And
my hubby.
Yeah, and he's kept me tethered to reality when I'm reporting on certain stories, like a woman being possessed by a supposed demon in Washington, Georgia. While we wait for, hopefully, if we wait for him, I'm going to tell that story real quick.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell that story.
I get an email from someone who's like, you should come visit this town in Georgia, Washington, Georgia, because, you know, there's the Confederate gold is supposedly here, and you know, maybe you want to look into it. And I was just like, yeah, that sounds interesting. I like Georgia. I'll go down there. Within 30 minutes or an hour of me being there, I meet this lady who says she's possessed by a demon. She walks into a house right after me meeting her, and she comes out screaming because the ghosts are apparently too loud for her. So I'm like, oh, this is a weird town. And the more I talked to her and her family and people who know her, people were starting to tell me, you know, I don't know if I really believe it or not, but a lot of people did believe it, that she was possessed by the second woman ever hanged by the state of Georgia, who I believe her name was Polly. And Polly, back in the 1800s, had her lover murder her husband.
Oh my God.
But the murder didn't go as planned. The lover, it was a lover and her brother, went and found this husband who was supposedly abusive and shot him, but they shot him poorly and shot his jaw off.
Oh my God.
And then they buried him in a shallow grave where he died in the grave. He didn't die immediately. And so she was eventually tried and hanged for this. And the town had a really hard time with this because they didn't want to hang a lady.
Yeah.
She had this beautiful dress on. There's conspiracy
Was
theories.
it blue or was it gold?
I think, nice. There's conspiracy theories even about her. So there's people who believe she didn't actually die. There's people who believe that she was saved by like one of the policemen and then taken to another town, and they found her name or a name similar to her, an age similar to her in like Tennessee or something. I believe she was probably killed by the town, and yeah, her hanging happened right there in the crossroads of the town, because they used to hang people on crossroads so they can confuse the soul, so the soul would know where to go. But these people in this town believe that woman I met within my first like 30 minutes of being in the town, where she was possessed by Polly. And this is the person who's, if you remember, her boyfriend threatened to skin me alive like a dog.
Oh God!
Because he was worried about the gold and all that stuff. Yeah, we have the audio. I have the audio of the guy actually sending it to us. And then the end of that was my buddy Clint, who was kind of like my tour guide through Washington, Georgia. His grandfather owned the property where the husband was shot in the mouth and buried.
Oh God!
And he believed, and this grandfather is like one of those guys, like I was saying earlier with my friend. Now, I don't believe in anything weird, but that goat went crazy because I had a goat that went crazy because I believe it was on the gravesite of the murdered husband. And he was like, it's possessed or something. And this is an old man who does not like to talk about this type of thing. I just came out in conversation. I spent like hours and days talking to them about history and all these other things, the gold. And then I hear that the man was buried there at the front of the property by this big, beautiful tree. And he's like, yeah, we had a goat and we had to give it away. The goat was so violent.
Wow.
And he said, the old man said that we gave it away, and where it wound up at the new property, totally fine.
What?
No one had a problem with the goat after it. You know, who knows? But is Chris available? Or?
Oh, let's see. Chris Carr, are you with us?
I like that the Discord's the issue tonight. Chris, I'm looking at the Chris.
Oh God.
Oh me.
Oh, hold on.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Are you there?
What's up, brother?
Yes. Is that
Okay.
a good
good.
volume?
No, you
Yes.
sound great. What's going on? It's good to hear from you.
Well, absolutely, it's a pleasure to call in. First of all, I have to congratulate both of you on a triumph of an episode. This was so great. The interview
Thanks,
with Tom was amazing.
Thank you.
It was just awesome. So, and I love you both, and it's just really cool to see you guys hit
Thanks,
this
man.
kind of achievement tonight. But I was also thinking it'd be cool to call in and talk about a little Hat Man.
We love a hat man.
Let's hear about Hat Man.
Hat Man. So at the time when I lived with a Hat Man, I did not know that this was a global phenomenon, but it has since been documented all over the world. But I guess it was about 2000. Well, no, it was exactly 2008. I moved into a very old home in Mount Vernon, New York, which is in Westchester. And it seemed suspicious. It was not a good-looking home. It was affordable for 4 roommates just out of college. The basement was just covered in like these tons and tons of rusty instruments. Like everything you would expect to be like kind of on a farm, but this was not by any means a farmhouse. And over time, there were just these strange things that were happening with roommates. We all were getting increasingly more angry. One roommate had, she said that she got like scratches and bruises on her arms and legs. Said that she claimed that she didn't know where they came from. And ultimately, the 4 of us independently experienced seeing a very tall man with a very large hat. And it would be like the first time that I clearly saw him in my peripheral vision. I mentioned it to my roommate, April, at the time. And I was just like, I just saw something and it really freaked me out. She's like, oh, you saw Hat Man. Like, you know, she'd already seen him. My other roommates saw him as well. And so did our 4th roommate. And it was so distinct in my mind that it happened, and you could see it. But it was also, I was thinking about this tonight for a couple of reasons. Also because well, first of all, I got really interested in Charles Manson when I lived in this house, and not just interested in just like, you know, wow, this is really crazy. I never really looked into this. It was more just like, you know, he didn't do it. He's not responsible. Kind of thing.
He also started believing in lizard people, just like you, Shane. So
well, as one should. That's a responsible man right there.
And it was also in this home when I started like discovering, you know, Ted Gunderson, the great FBI agent that broke open a lot of satanic panic stuff, and I discovered, you know, the Rothschilds, and I mean, rabbit holes upon rabbit holes. But
formative years.
Oh, absolutely. And Alex was there for them. Can you imagine?
It says a lot that she stayed with you. That's a good woman.
15 years later, it was like.
But the actual vision of Hat Man was very real. Like I can tell you because I looked it up. I had to know what hat it was. It was not a usual hat, and if I can remember right, it was called a Stetson Austral hat. It's a very specific hat.
That's right.
It's very wide brimmed, more wide brimmed than a cowboy hat or a sun hat or anything like that. It's got a very specific shape.
That's right.
And the other thing is, like in this house, there were very specific visions of violence that would just sort of like kind of inject itself into your brain. And it was also that constant feeling, like the story of the doll, the little the elf.
The elf. Yep.
You just knew that there was someone looking at you. I mean, like you just feel it. Like if you're in a car with somebody, you know that somebody's in the back seat. You knew that he was there. Like you could just feel eyes, you could feel something violent, and you could feel something awful. And ultimately, when I moved out of this house, Alex and I moved into Queens. And man, that first night, as soon as I got to that apartment, it was like it was just a sense of relief that I haven't experienced in my life up until that point. Like
I have to say, I had one of the worst. I had one of the worst dreams in that house. I remember, like, because Chris had a cat, and I remember dreaming. It was so violent that he was taking the cat and throwing the cat against the wall.
Whoa! Hat Man was getting into everyone's brains.
Yeah, it was a pretty scary house.
Did everyone feel a sense of relief when they left that house?
I think that some roommates kind of embraced that feeling. I remember one of our roommates was just like, She was just like, I love it here, and I love how much I hate everything. Like,
Oh,
I mean, it was like,
What?
Amityville.
That's just a
It was
New
like
Yorker.
it was a house possession. No, she wasn't a New Yorker. She was a
She was
podunk
living
from
in New York.
Kentucky. Well, she was, but
Podunk from
I do anything. Yeah,
whoa.
but no, it was pervasive, and it was palpable. Like, it wasn't something that you could just write off as, hey, maybe you're going through something. Maybe all four of us were going through something. Like, there was something in that house, and that something was definitely Hat Man.
Wow. In the theme of today's episode with MK Ultra and widespread mass hypnosis and brain washing and mind control, I wonder how much paranormal stuff could be, blamed on widespread human experimentation.
I don't know. I mean, my kind of take on this is that it comes from a spiritual level.
Yep.
I think there's just like naturally evil spirits, and I
Oh,
think
yeah.
those evil spirits find ways to manifest themselves and trick humans. I think that's kind of like their main operation, is to
Yep.
figure out a way to, what about a Hat Man? It's going to be different. What about
Right.
what about a gray alien? Like you
Right.
said, the person who talked about gray aliens, and she perceived them to be demons, as you said correctly. And then it's also just like, I'm just a little boy. I'm a ghost of a little boy lost in your house. And it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
no. I think that all of this kind of can be calibrated down to an evil presence that has a malevolent intention. And
yeah.
I mean, that was my experience.
I think you're right. I think that stuff exists, and I think that there's people in power who are trying to replicate it on their own, and we're living in a world where both things are happening at once.
And harness it.
And harness it.
Definitely.
Yeah. Turn it
Absolutely.
against you. And perhaps they're even possessed by the real ones to then replicate fake ones to populate the earth.
Well, I mean, like that, when you read things about like what happened way out in Montauk, with the, I forget what they called that operation that happened out
Montauk
there, but they
Project,
had that
right?
the Montauk Project. They had that whole base that was like super military, super secret. It's now shuttered up, and they call it like Camp Hero, and it's like the scariest park you've ever visited in your life. And even Thomas Pynchon, in one of his books, Razor's Edge, Bleeding Edge, he talks about that, about how, like, this was a place where evil government operatives performed malicious acts on children in order to access that evil plane, in order to bring that energy down here and then use it against their own citizens. So,
Yes.
I do think that there is something to there. For sure.
It's funny you brought up Pynchon. And we both love Pynchon. And for those listening, if you want to really get into Thomas Pynchon, please do. I was thinking about him so much the past few days leading up to the interview with Tom, because Pynchon, to me, although writes supposedly fiction, it seems so real when you get deep into the weeds of stuff like Chaos and the paranoia of the modern American mind. If you read Inherent Vice or Crying of Lot 49, it's all just a web of conspiracies.
Yeah. And I mean, over the course of all of his novels, he has basically visited every atrocity since 1915. And the thing about Pynchon is that you can't write him off as just a conspiracy nutcase. And things like the journalistic efforts of Tom O'Neill validate Pynchon and his body of work. But the funny thing about him is that throughout all these atrocities, whether it's World War II or World War I, or things that were happening in the Middle East in the late 1800s, he's always there just playing a kazoo and making jokes about it, writing goofy songs about it, So, I mean, he's like a total absurdist when it comes to the greatest atrocities of the 19th and 20th century.
It's so worth reading. If you finish reading Chaos and you want a book to read, I would say Inherent Vice would be a good complementary.
Sure.
And perhaps one of the easier Pynchon reads. If you don't want to you want to really go crazy, go read Gravity's Rainbow. But dang.
Oh, yeah,
dude.
That's a great catapult into insanity right there.
Yeah, good luck. Well, I appreciate you calling in, man. It was great talking to you.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to talk to you all.
Always great talking to you. And until next time, brother.
Bye, Chris Carr.
All right, I'll talk.
That was awesome. Hat Man.
Hat Man, man.
Man.
Believe it.
I think America has descended into full-blown paranoia.
Yeah.
I think a lot about Twin Peaks and David Lynch.
Yeah.
And whether he knows it or not, I think he probably tapped into something very true about America. And a good symbol of that is the character of Laura Palmer's mother in the first two seasons, who spoiler alert, although it's like 30 years old now. The bad guy who's possessed by a demon has been drugging up his wife, Laura Palmer, the dead girl's mom, and she's been living in a state of like psychosis, like just like numb to everything. And to me, that always seemed like a metaphor for America, like the way we're obviously over pilled. There's so many people on pills, psychoactive, whether it's over the counter, whether it's stuff they're getting in an alley somewhere. America's on drugs. Yeah. And I don't think that's very good. Yeah. And I think that's an extension of MK Ultra as well. And it's like you add that to the bad media diet, to the false narratives everyone's building. Like they've got someone like Bugliosi, who prosecuted Charles Manson, wrote a best-selling book about it called Helter Skelter. He's seen as the authority. Then you read Tom O'Neill's book, you look behind the curtain, you see this guy's a violent thug who's just as bad, if not worse, than Charles Manson. Why would you believe that guy? Right. And it's just crazy. It's, for those who watch like Tim and his show, he used to bring up like the Gell-Mann amnesia, which is something I think is very interesting. And you can apply that to this. And that's basically, if you're reading the paper and say, a lot about, since we're talking about Tim, you know a lot about skateboarding, and you read an article about skateboarding and that's all wrong about the moves and everything. You turn the page and you're talking about some war. And they got everything wrong on that page, but then you're going to believe this page about the war because you're not connected to it at all. Yeah. Now zoom out of that, and that's like history. That is what's happening to the American consciousness. Is they are feeding you one reality that's just a siphoned, like siloed version of the real reality. Like we started the show, the official story is never the full story.
Or maybe we're just a Truman Show.
I think Truman Show was predictive programming. And on that note, thanks for watching Inverted World Live. It's been awesome. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks to our callers. Big thanks to Tom O'Neill. It was a real honor talking to him. I hope to have him back at a later date. If you want to find us online, I'm at Shane Cashman. If you want to send a story to submit for being a caller, you can throw it to Shane Cashman at scanner.com. That's my name at scnr.com. Working through getting through all of my submissions, but you'll hear from me eventually. You can call in. We'll send you a link. We'll get you on. We'll talk about strange stories. And Alex, where can they find you?
Okay, you can find me at I am Alex Ayala on X. That's about it.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining us.
Good night,
Please
everybody.
Share it with everyone.
Be safe.
We'll see you next week.
Avoid Hatman.